Everybody, my name is Ray Cool. I'm CEO of PBSI Technology Solutions. Thank you to each of you who've taken time to attend this webinar. The content today, we're going to discuss business risks of using free and shared email accounts, really a couple of separate issues. Important content. We'll be quick today. As always, for those of you who've attended others' webinars, I speak quickly. I apologize for that, but we'll move quickly. So you might want to maximize the screen in front of you as we move on. So our goal today is to inform and educate. So yes, PBSI sells technology products and services, but this content, as with most of the content we deliver, came about through recognition of a problem that we see at various organizations, and we pay attention to things that we receive, and we pay attention to conversations. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but the content today, what are the benefits for those who are using an email address that might be Gmail or at my cable provider or Yahoo, or please know, there is no criticism in me or in the content of this. Everybody makes business decisions about how they structure their email. So you're perfectly fine using Gmail and associated email addresses. I want to talk about what are some reasons that you might consider doing something different than that. So specifically, one of the most important things that has come on the market in years, security-wise, is an Office 365 product called Advanced Threat Protection, and it's a specific thing that's available only if you have your own domain. So I'll talk about why and how that works. We'll discuss the security and liability risks of using large domains. So Gmail, Yahoo, and the like carry some conditions that we'll just discuss. Then the special case of any address, if you have an employee where their work email address, whether it is at your domain or whether it is at Gmail, if an email address is shared, there are some really important concerns to be aware of. And then we'll talk about, so if you do want to make a change, what is a step-by-step plan? It's really not a difficult thing, and it's not an expensive thing to change. So how does it work? And we'll talk about how is it different if an email address is shared, and we'll review costs, and we'll be finished in less than a half hour. So most of you, thank you very much, know PBSI. Some of you, this is your first exposure to PBSI. We are a technology services provider for hundreds of clients in Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana in lots of sectors. We have lots and lots of healthcare experience and lots of experience in other businesses and nonprofits as well. It's from the experience that we've gained over 30 years in IT that we deliver content in these webinars. So one of the fantastic things for me personally as CEO of PBSI, I know we just have a large team of really experienced people who care about clients. So 75% of our staff have been with us for 10 years or more. And those of you who work with PBSI know exactly what I'm talking about. My thanks to you who are clients, and my thanks to our staff who really make PBSI what it is. So today, our content, some of you who've attended previous webinars have heard this same information. I'm going to do a dark web search. My context is different today. A dark web search is something, I'm going to click on this link in a moment, and we're going to look on the dark side of the universe. We're going to go see where email addresses and exposed passwords are for sale on the dark web. So the context of this email content today really comes from emails and passwords have been exposed. There are 3.1 billion email addresses exposed and for sale, and 1.2 billion of them have exposed cracked passwords. The other roughly 2 billion also have passwords stored, but they haven't been necessarily cracked yet. So the yet is where I'm going to talk specifically. What kind of additional risk do you have of further exposure if you use large domains like Gmail or Yahoo? And I'm not picking on particular vendors. Those are fine services. They simply are attack targets. So large email domains are massive targets for password decryption attackers. So I'm going to go do this search now. So this is a place where you can't get to. We pay a monthly fee for the ability to do this. And let me say, if you're listening to me and you would like us to do a search for your domain or a list of email addresses, though we pay for the service, we will do this for free for any clients because it's important to know whether or not your password's been exposed. So what I'm going to do in a real short demonstration is I'm going to search for compromised credentials. So first, I'll do a search for pbsinet.com. This is a typical domain, I'm going to say. We're very security conscious at PBSI, and yet we know from experience that there are 51 cases out there for sale on the dark web where PBSI passwords have been exposed. So notice in the password column these 3 X's and this garbage, and then there's one that appears to be a real exposed password, and then there are some cases where this has been exposed via cracking. That is a typical domain. We can search for individual email addresses. Now I'm going to search for gmail.com. Sorry. Actually, let me search for it. Gmail.com. So it's going to take a little longer for this to respond, but what you'll see might be eye-opening. Again, I'm not picking on Gmail. Just think any email service that has hundreds of thousands of email addresses associated. So gmail.com has 425 million compromised credentials, 425 million. If I click here, now notice the password column where how many of these passwords are already exposed. The percentage of passwords that have been successfully cracked and are for sale is a much higher percentage. So I could go farther into this list. And I'm not trying to frighten anybody with Gmail. And I'll also say that most everybody of those 425 million, they did nothing wrong. They didn't make a security mistake. They instead likely stored their password at a site, LinkedIn or DocuSign or whatever, that was hacked, Target, and that site was hacked, and so the email and password they used on that site has been exposed. So I'm going to do one more. We'll do Yahoo. If we do a cable provider, so Roadrunner or Bardstown Cable or whatever, then we'll likely find hundreds or thousands of addresses. But these very large services, Hotmail and the like, it's taking a moment for this to respond because there are so many of them, but we're going to see something very similar to Gmail. There are hundreds of millions of exposures. 554 million to be exact. And the same thing is true when I get to the details. We could go a long time before we start finding passwords where they weren't attacked. And so my goal is not to expose anybody's email addresses, but to make the point that all of us have a risk. We know that employees, maybe ourselves, we use the same email address and password on multiple accounts. We create risk for ourselves and for the organization when we use those duplicate passwords. The risk is greater if we use large domains. So let me talk about what are the good reasons that we might want to use an at my organization email address as opposed to a Yahoo or a Gmail. So some of these are subjective, of course. Professionalism, there's a perception of quality. Client retention, none of us, rarely do we know why a client or a patient leaves us. Likewise, referrals, what is going on in the mind of a patient or a client who refers our organization to their friends, and what perception issues might be involved where the little things make a difference. So I don't know if this is important in your organization or not, but it's certainly something that most people recognize as possible, that our business would increase if we used a domain that seems, pardon me for saying this, this is not intended as a criticism, more professional. So unrecognized email, when you get an email from somebody at Gmail, you might not know, but if you get it from pbsinet.com, you likely know that came from PBSI. Undelivered email, same thing. Spam filters apply different tests with large groups of emails. So one self-test here, self-test. You make a purchase online to a vendor you've never used. You come across the final step and you see that their email address is at gmail.com. Do you complete the purchase? So again, no criticism. I'm simply saying consider that there are other benefits of a domain, and it's not expensive. Improved security. This is something that a lot of people don't know. Free services are free because they use and or sell our data. And that's virtually universally true. Gmail, we have an agreement that we sign, AOL, whoever the vendor is, if the service is free, there is some way they're collecting money, and in almost all cases, it's the way our data is used. So controlling where our organizational information ends up is an issue where we simply have more control if we don't put our data out there with a shared service. Certainly, we're a smaller attack target for cyber attackers. Hackers tend to feel less inclined to waste efforts going for a domain that has 30 email addresses than Gmail that has hundreds of millions of email addresses. That just makes common sense. So it doesn't mean that we can't be attacked. If we're small, it simply means the likelihood of attack is smaller. So organizational security. Pardon me, I have a bit of a cold. You might be able to tell I'm going to stop for a drink. Pardon me. So controlling the security settings of where our data goes and what happens with that is something that we can do. So then I'm going to mention this advanced threat protection. This is $2 a month that provides click prevention. Instead of a warning, if I click on something bad and I'm using either Exchange Online with this ATP or Office 365 with ATP, my click on what would have been a disastrous link or a disastrous attachment, this $2 a month feature causes that email to go out to a sandbox in the cloud, and whatever is going to be done is done there. And so if there's something bad that's going to happen, I'm delivered a message that says, ooh, that was bad, instead of being delivered a ransomware attack. So I'm going to do a short demonstration. There are two things involved here. Each of the two things I'm going to demonstrate are a $2 a month add-on to the basic $4 a month for Exchange Online. So Exchange Online with Microsoft, put your email in the cloud, and everything about email is included in that $4 a month. Add $2 for this advanced threat protection and another $2 a month separate option to provide email encryption and some other security options. So I'm going to demonstrate this. I'm going to go to my inbox, and I sent myself an email that originally came from our security administrator who said this would be a good link to test, so watch what happens. I'm going to click on this link in my email, and if you notice in my URL, Microsoft has directed that to Safe Links. That's the name of this sandbox in the cloud, and that was a bad link. But instead of getting a virus, I simply got a message back that says, bad website, shouldn't have done that. So very simple for me, very expensive if I didn't have ATP. So PBSI moved to Exchange Online and ATP virtually, we started the process virtually the same day we learned about this feature because it's so important. Same thing happens with an attachment. I got a call from a client not too long ago. He said, I'm having trouble opening the email. It sounded suspicious. I said, forward it to me. He did. This is the attachment. And again, I would never have done that had I not had my ATP protection, but it says, this is bad, you shouldn't have done that, go back to safety. And that is the short message of the benefits of advanced threat protection and Azure information protection. Two separate options. So the reason personally that I would direct most of us, the most important reason away from a Gmail and to an Exchange Online is to be able to take advantage of this protection, because we've had so many clients where despite training and security put in place, the wrong person clicked the wrong link and they got a ransomware attack, and it was dozens or hundreds of hours and untold pain. And do we need to report a breach to HHS? And you just don't want to go there. This is really inexpensive protection. Okay, enough about that. So what other risks? So I'm going to talk about risks in two categories: the risks of large domains like a Gmail, and then I'm going to separately talk about the risks of shared email, where a person at work uses their work email for personal stuff as well as work stuff. So risks. Large domains experience significantly higher attack rates. Okay, so we've talked about that. The sophistication of attacks. Attackers, there are tools out there, and I'm sure you've read about them or heard about them, where the quote bad actors, is it China, is it Russia, is it Iran, is it North Korea, is it a really sophisticated hacking group in Russia? Those folks who have the highest level of sophistication are going to direct their attacks first at the targets where there's highest potential payback. So we put ourselves out there at risk by using a large service. So this fact that people tend to reuse passwords, and we all know this is true, and it's unfortunate, but password management is a very difficult problem. So can we expect that all of a sudden tomorrow we can count on all of our employees to never reuse the same password? Because once they've used that password and that combination has been exposed out there on the dark web, then that can be used to attack small targets like our internal email or US Bank or Huntington Bank or so forth. Just try the same email and password combination. So the fact that password reuse has happened and that our employees have had passwords exposed, it's a fact, not for all of us, but for many, many of us, then that reuse and the fact that it was exposed on a Gmail or so forth creates a security issue for us. So large domains don't have the same kind of flexibility. Within Office 365, for example, there are hundreds of security settings that we've learned a lot about this, so we know what the defaults to set, but then there are choices that can be made and customized with an organization so that a certain kind of thing that you're involved in is let through, that for an OB practice, the word sex might not have the same filter as for, a different organization. Just large domains are not as flexible in that kind of thing. So advanced threat protection, this is my big one, that you can only use advanced threat protection if you own your own domain. So I had a case in point that came to mind. I was not really thinking about this. We have a client, great client, large medical office in Cincinnati, and their email addresses are at hospital name because the hospitals provided their email, no problem. So we've provided their Office 365, and I was talking to the manager and talked about this ATP, and she said, "Oh, sign us up, $2 a month, do it." So we did, and then went to set it up and realized, oh my gosh, no, we can't do that because at hospital name is a domain that is used beyond this practice, and we can't route all of their email traffic through this ATP site. So anybody who uses an at my cable company or at my hospital or anything other than at my organization address, you can't use ATP. So inherited liability. Terms. So everyone who signs up for a service, and let's say that an employee with a Gmail address acknowledged Google's terms. So your employee agreed to Google's terms, but the company didn't. Or wait a minute, yes, we did. We did, because when the employee is issued an email address by the organization and we put them in a place where they must approve, we have approved Gmail's terms, and they do allow email content searches, and they do allow website searches. It's part of what they do. We all understand that. So unless the organization has sole control over email permissions, there is liability for personal decisions made that's inherited by the organization. Same is true of cloud storage. So a lot of times, if we use Gmail, we use Google Drive. When an employee chooses storage locations, this can be separate from email. Is it always organized by the organization, or is there an entrepreneurial employee who says, hey, I know we can store all this on Gmail, I'll set it up, and they do it, but it wasn't really directed by the organization. When that employee leaves, or the choices they made of permissions and who's allowed to add, change, or remove information, all of that is true also of email. But the inherited liability of employee decisions comes along with permitting employees to make decisions in this area. So I'm not trying to suggest that we all become big brother for our employees. We certainly don't do that at PBSI, but we have standards, and and there are reasons for the standards. So unapproved access to storage your email is an issue unless the organization has control. And then there's access to required legal documentation. None of us ever want to be there, but most organizations at least understand that there's a need to be able to store history that we can get to when we need it of email. And if an employee has the choice of whether they set their email to delete deleted mail on exit or other similar choices, then the organization loses the ability to control what history is stored. So the solutions are simple, which is good. So I want to make a distinction between controlled versus shared email addresses. So controlled, I'm going to define as created and controlled exclusively by the organization. So it might be with Gmail or Yahoo, but the organization performed the email setup. We hired an employee and they got the name Susan at gmail.com. But the organization did it. The organization maintains control over the settings, permissions, and history. And when the password needs to be reset, the organization's involved and has documentation and control. So that can be done and managed very, very well when using a large domain. I want to move, though, to what becomes a more difficult problem is when the line gets crossed and an employee who's now familiar with using their email address. So I'm Ray C at pbsinet.com. If I choose to use that email address on my Amazon account, I've started creating an issue because I'm now starting to receive personal emails at my work email, and so any future separation becomes problematic. I'll dive into that a little more. So a shared email might have been set up initially by the employee. Here's the instruction sheet. You're a new employee, set up your Gmail address for our organization, but later on they may start sharing that and we have a hard time controlling that. So what kind of control does the organization have and what kind of control is exercised? Unfortunately, we're all really busy and we set policies and then we assume that people follow them, but what if they don't? And what risks do we incur if they don't follow the policies? If an employee is given permission to use personal email for work, so we hire an employee and they say, well, what if I need to send a work email? If our answer is, well, we only give work emails to 2 or 3 people, and if you have to send something, just use your personal email. Well, that creates a problem. We'll talk about it a little more. There are settings for archiving policies, access to history, password changes. They all become problematic, if not before, on the day of departure. So understanding email control, if an employee can change permissions, we see it as an organization the right to require standards. It's not that we don't have a policy, but we can't control it. And once we start loose controls, we've all experienced this in different ways, changing it later becomes more difficult. What, you don't trust me? I just had my review and I thought I was doing a really good job. Or even worse, I know you don't trust me and now I see this change coming, or I feel you don't trust me, and so forth. So re-exerting control is difficult. So when you go from previous pattern to now we're going to use at my organization email, you can reset all of that without any employee thinking, oh, it was me that was being, quote, targeted by this new policy. So it's also true that the organization absorbs the risks associated with how employees communicate. Well, that's true with any email, but the risks get a little more dicey when the email address is shared. So let me move on from that. I want to go through step by step. What's the process we would use if we decided we wanted to change to my org? So we acquire a domain. PBSI can do that for you. It's $99 for 3 years or something. It's inexpensive. Many already have, and at my org you have a website. You just don't have email associated with it. So associating email is $4 exchange online plus another 2 plus 2. For most people, it's $6 a month. If you don't need encryption, then it's $6 a month. So we start by importing contacts, email, and calendar from whatever the previous email was. Gmail, Yahoo, whatever, we can import them all. Fine, so now we have our new email address set up and we're starting to use it. On the old email account, real simple. If it's a organization email, we simply set it to auto forward. So now all the email flows to the new email. Nothing's lost, nothing's missed, no hassle. Then on the new email, employee sends an email address to their business contacts because they might have some personal ones in there. I have a new address, please change my address. Then, so most people do that, and the employee then monitors the new email for receipts to the old, because if somebody still is sending to the old Gmail account, it's coming into my new @org email, but I can see that it was sent to Gmail, so I can reply, hey, I have a new address, please change. Within a period of months, most of that has been cleaned out, smooth and simple. No emails are ever lost. Transition is smooth, no risks. That's the way to do it in advance. Okay, so if we have a shared address, similar, so now we decide to do this, but the employee has been using their Gmail for some work and some personal. So we set up the new email, and now it's optional. Do we want to import all the contacts and email? Because the employee might say, well, whoa, wait a minute. No, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. So that becomes a potential issue. And then the same thing, then the employee says, well, I'm going to go and remove my personal contacts and email. Okay, so once we shared it, though, we started this problem that created this issue. But I want to say, if there's any one key message to today's web connection, it is, if you have this situation, do this today. I don't mean literally today, but don't wait. And I'll describe why here in just a second. So on the old email address, we set them to auto forward. Oh, wait a minute. If my personal emails are there, do I want to do that? So if the employee says, no, we can't auto forward, now there are two addresses to check. The employee's checking the old one, and they're also checking the new one. But they monitor the old email. They're a cooperative employee, and when they get an email to their Gmail, they say, hey, I have a new email address at my org, and within a period of months, the separation's taken place, cleanup takes place, and over time, they're completely separated. So again, really no significant issue. But now, what I just went through is on the top of the screen. What if that's done on an employee's last day, or the week before, or the week after? Now, what I put in red is the same process as above, but think about it. Now we have an employee who's angry, who's just been terminated, who has who knows what kind of emotional baggage associated with the termination that just happened. So we want to import the email. Oh, wait a minute, it was the employee's Gmail. Do we have the right to do that? Or are all those email contacts gone and all email history? Do we even have the right? How do we get the employee's cooperation? If we do, then the organization, not the employee, sends an email to the contacts. Sue is no longer here. Please use this address. It's a different kind of communication as opposed to the employee saying, I have a new address, use this new address. On the old email contact account, that the employee identifies business contacts and the, wait a minute, who's in control? The employee sends the email, and it might say, hey, I've left organization A, but what if it's, you won't believe what they did to me? And then emails come in a month later and a week later. Instead of saying, hey, I have a new email address, now you're still doing business with them, and now it's a declining list of customers. And within a period of months, most work contents, instead of being separated, are now lost. So that's obviously, I'm describing a bad situation, but consider this, every employee leaves by retirement, by death, or some other process. We don't want to wait until an employee leaves to make this change. So quickly, we're finished. Exchange Online, $4 a month per email address, $2 a month advanced threat protection for everyone. Yes, you should do this. Only those staff who need to be able to encrypt email, which in most organizations is a fairly small number. So for most of us, it's $6 a month. Then I won't go further, but adding Microsoft Office, where you get 5 copies of Office per address, adds $8.50 a month. So those are some choices. We can give quotes to everybody easily. So we're finished with content. In summary, what we talked about is there are benefits to using an @my-organization email, but to me, more importantly, there are security risks, and certainly there are separation risks. So I want to thank an unnamed client who is listening, who in a conversation we had some weeks ago started me realizing this is a really important conversation. We were talking through this employee separation process, and I realized people need to think through the problem of unsharing email addresses. So we're finished. I thank you for your attendance. I hope everybody has a great day.